Good morning. Um, I'm going to tell you a story. It's a very factual story because it's my story. But first, I want to ask, like anybody, what is intimacy? What is intimacy to you? What does it mean? Okay, that's a good answer. Intimacy originally was defined that it was a close familiar bond or fellowship, and now it's defined as an intimate act, especially a sexual intercourse. So it shows you that there's two different definitions. But the very root of the word means it's a bond. It has nothing to do with sexual intercourse. And so my entire life was a lesson on intimacy. And that's why it's so important to me to understand intimacy. And my father, he committed suicide before I was born, so I didn't have a dad growing up. I longed for a dad. I longed for a male affirmation in my life. And I looked for male affirmation and male confirmation. And there happened to be men who knew exactly what I was seeking, and they took advantage of that. And I was molested several times by different men, family of the friend, a neighbor, strangers. For me, I identified love with that negative behavior, with sexual behavior with men. I also noticed the more feminine I acted, the more attention I received. I looked at the women in my life and I saw how they were receiving attention that I was seeking from men, and it wasn't as painful as the attention I was receiving from men. So I figured, well, maybe God made a mistake, and I was supposed to be a girl. Well, the only time I ever talked to God as a child was twice. Once was, can I wake up and be a girl tomorrow? And then when I woke up and wasn't a girl, I was like, why'd you do this? You made a mistake. However, I started acting it out. I started getting more feminine. I started dressing more feminine. I started running away, sneaking out at night, hanging out with a very bad crowd, going into clubs at 12, 13, 14 years old. And at 14, my mom said to me, I had a son, I didn't have a daughter. You're not going to act like that. You're not going to be that. You're not going to do that. If that's what you want to do, there's the door. And at 14, I walked out the door and I lived on the streets of Philadelphia. And at 14, I started buying female hormones at the club, like I would go and buy weed and go buy other drugs. Just as simple, I buy female hormones. And at 14, I started dressing like a girl. At 14, I started prostituting my body to survive. And then at 14, I was HIV positive. This wasn't abnormal in my community because everybody I knew at that time had HIV. Many of them were dropping dead and they were doing so very quickly because the medications that they had out then just went in and killed good cells and bad cells, killed everything. So they just destroyed your body. I could tell you all about my teen years and my 20s, but they were all the same. Wake up. My only goal when I was your age, my only goal was to be the best hooker I could be. That was it. And I was in and out of juvenile detention, in and out of county jail, and then as an adult, in and out of prison. My second time in prison, I was 30 years old, 30-something years old, and I looked like a woman. I mean, believe it or not, I really did. I looked like a woman, and I'm in a man's prison because I was a man, and I'm as if looking like a woman in a man's prison isn't, attention grabbing enough. I was out in the middle of this rec yard cheerleading, doing cheers, trying to get more attention. And there was a correctional officer, and he saw me, and he says, "Come here." And I'm like, "What?" I bounced up to him. He said, "What's your name?" I said, "My name is Paige." He said, "No, that's a girl's name. What's the name your mama gave you?" I said, "David." He said, "Well, David, do you know God didn't create you to be this way?" And I'm going to tell you something. I was offended. I was angry. I was hurt. I thought this dude is like drinking haterade. He's hating on me. How dare he? But there was something different about that man. And I looked at him and I was like, yeah, well, sure he did. Look at me. I do this well. And he said, no, God didn't even intend for you to look like this. And because I care, I'm going to tell you this every day. And he told me this every day. Every single day he would see me say, God didn't create you to be that way. And I'd be like, I know. And I'd keep trucking. Got to the point where I would see him and I'd be like, God didn't create me to be this way. And I'd keep on walking. And now I didn't get out of prison and become some man of God and go preaching the Bible and stand on the corner doing street witnessing. I didn't do all that. Like a dog, I returned to my vomit. And I added a couple more sins and started gambling and selling dope. And back into that loving community that I knew so well. Until 2008, because of all the female hormones that I had taken, my teeth started just coming right out of the bone. All my bones started receding. I started having a severe bone loss. I was diagnosed with osteoporosis. Osteoporosis is known as an elderly woman's disease. But because of all the hormones that I had taken, there were so many results and complications because of them. And so in 2008, I had to walk with a walker, couldn't stand up straight, and my bone density was almost gone. But that didn't stop me. I'm in excruciating pain. I'm taking Oxycontin, oxycodone, hydrocodone. I'm smoking weed. I'm doing anything I can to kill the pain. And the pain wasn't going anywhere. But the pain didn't stop me from dragging myself to the club or dragging myself to the casino so that I could indulge. 2009, it all came to an end because I was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS. And I had infections in my brain. I had infections in my blood. I had no immune system. They measure your immune system by T cells. My T cells went from 7,000 to 11 to 0, all within like 3 months. So I had no immune system, boils all over my body from the infections trying to fight their way out. And if any of you ever heard of Job, I had Job boils. They were everywhere and they hurt. And the doctor put hospice in place, put a hospital bed in my bedroom. And then hospice team came out to my house and they gave me all this neat little plastic furniture so I could die in peace. And doctor said, you don't even have to take the HIV meds anymore because you won't survive. There's absolutely no hope. I said, okay. So while I was in prison, I had received a Bible in the mail, and I never really read it. Somebody told me Psalms was inspirational. I opened it up. I read it. Didn't sound real inspirational to me. He was talking about, Lord, crush them and bring them to their knees. I was like, in the Foot Locker it goes. When I got home from prison, that Bible went on my nightstand. I used it as a coaster. And I still have that Bible, and it has all the rings in it from all the different drinks that it held. Well, that Bible was sitting on my nightstand, and I'm laying in this hospital bed in my own bedroom, and I'm wasting away. I was in excruciating pain. I was having multiple mini strokes daily because of the infection that made its way into my bloodstream, thus making its way into my brain. Nurses would come out and tend to me. Family members would come. And I knew two things when I laid on my deathbed. I knew I was afraid to die. And I knew I was afraid to die because I didn't want to go to hell. And I knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, and many people that I know now that came to that point, you just know that there's a hell and that you're on your way there. And I knew I was on my way there because I had earned my place there. I had slept with thousands of people intentionally over a 20-year period, intentionally trying to infect them with HIV. Because I was angry, I was hurt, I was broken. And that's what happens When the enemy comes in and you're young, and that's what happens when you get molested or when you get beaten or when you get neglected, or there's two common denominators that I know now with most of the men that come to me for counsel. And the first one is that they didn't have a father in their life. Some of them had a physical father in their life, but he wasn't a very good father. And then the rest of them didn't have any father in their life. Some of them don't even know who their father is. And the other one was that they had trauma as a child. Molestation, physical, mental abuse. And so my goal here isn't to make any of you think like I think. My goal here isn't to make you believe what I believe. Because all I want you to do is think and see. Because I'm a witness, a living, breathing witness of truth. One that can't be destroyed. Because my truth is factual. Because I walked it, I lived it. So I got to the point where I was like, you know what? Why not pick up this Bible? And I picked it up, and the very first verse, I opened it up, and the very first verse I ever read in the New Testament was Romans 1:27, and it said, men burning in lust for one another, giving up the natural use of the woman. And I'm like, really? Like, why that verse? Why me? And I knew at that moment that I wasn't just living sinfully, but I was living unnaturally. And that means a lot, because I started looking at my entire life, and what I was seeking, I never found it. My entire life, over 30 years, I spent in that movement. That's what it is. It is a movement, and I'm not trying to say. See, there's a big split when it comes to the LGBT movement, even amongst the LGBT. And the split comes in because we think of the LGBT, we think of the ones we see in our families or our friends, co-workers, our neighbors, oh, they're victims. Everyone hates on them, and what it must be like to have to go through that and endure that. And then some of us think of LGBT, we think of parading down the street, half naked with a feather boa around their neck. But neither of them examples are the LGBT movement. Both of those examples are victims of the LGBT movement. The LGBT movement is just that. It's a movement. It's a dark movement. And what it's doing is setting its talons into each of its victims. Listen, I used to cry at night. I don't want to be this way. Why am I this way? Why am I attracted to men? Why do I have this attraction? Why? I know parents right now. I know two different parents right now that in the past month have had to hold their children in their arms at night, bawling their eyes out. One had to take the rope off of his son's neck because his son wanted to end his life because he didn't want to be this way. The other one, they had to comfort their daughter who keeps cutting herself. And she just gave up and she tried to cut wrists. And she tried to do it the right way because she went from here to here. There's such a split when it comes to this movement. Am I going to say the movement is evil? Dan Skippy. Am I going to say that the people that are victims of the movement are evil? Absolutely not. I've been set free from that movement, and I've been healed. Okay, I've tested HIV negative. Okay, I've been healed, and there's no doubt about that. Diabetes gone, HIV gone. But even throughout the first 9 years of being set free, actually being made free. Because AA can set you free, but there's only one way to be made free, and that's by Jesus Christ. And you can take that for whatever you see it to be worth. But 4 months ago, I got on my face. I said, Lord, what am I supposed to do? You've given me the ability to see women the way you created me to see women. I totally understand that we are all heterosexual by design. It's in our makeup. You can't change it. You can dilute it. You can deny it. You can drown it out, but you can't change it. Just like our DNA, male or female. There's nothing in between, nothing beyond. And any dysphoria means confusion. And I was really confused for 30 years, really confused. So one thing I noticed is that all these years I had this attraction still for men. Even after he gave me the ability to see women, I had never been attracted to a woman, ever. I didn't see anything attractive about women except that I wanted to be one. That was it. And then one day I walked into Walmart and I looked at this woman and I was physically attracted and mentally attracted, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And I ran out of the store and I got in my car and I started crying. And I'm like, Lord, I don't want to see women the way I saw men. I want to lust after women the way I lusted after men. I want to see women the way you see women. And he has granted me that ability. But I was in deep prayer and I said, Lord, just take this attraction from me. Remove it. And the Holy Spirit gave me a confidence. Why would I want him to remove something that he placed in me? It's not an attraction. All of my life, I've desired intimacy with other men because that's what he created me to be, intimate. In a football locker room, in any sports locker room, there's intimacy. And there's a level of intimacy that you don't experience in most other places. In the Army bunkhouse, there's intimacy. Because men that are masculine and I don't mean macho and I don't mean toxic and all this other nonsense they're talking about nowadays, that if you're masculine then you're sexist and racist and evil and violent. That's all machoism. Those aren't even characteristics of true masculinity. But masculine men, they don't have no issue with being intimate with other men because they're comfortable in who and what they are. But I didn't understand that. Even as a Christian, even as a man of God, even as I walked this walk, I still struggled. And I even say it in my little testimonial book. It's not that I don't struggle. I just don't struggle with the struggle because I'm safe and secure in the finished work of Jesus Christ. And that sounds good, but that's a crock of nonsense. Because it was never an attraction to begin with. It was intimacy. It was a desire for intimacy, and God placed that in me. And I wanted him to remove that. And he didn't want to remove it, and he wasn't going to remove it. But once I recognized it as my desire for intimacy, the attraction went away because there was no attraction to begin with. See, if somebody can make you believe that you have an attraction to men, then guess what? An attraction means that you're going to have to be either romantic and or sexual with them. There's no way around it. I know a young man right now. Him and his best friend are having what they call a bromance. And they both have girlfriends. And they both live with their girlfriends. One of them has kids. One has one on the way. And they have been taught that that if they have this desire for intimacy, that it means that they have an attraction. And they have to be reprogrammed. We have to reframe that information because it's false. It's not an attraction. It's a desire for intimacy in its true meaning. So basically, intimacy is best explained as into me. See, if you can see into me, then we can have an intimate relationship. I don't know if any of you know the Bible, but two characters in the Bible, David and Jonathan, were very intimate. And King David, he had many women, and he even struggled with adultery. But David and Jonathan, that most intimate relationship in its true definition of the word, has been tainted. It is the most twisted and tainted part of Scripture there ever was, because it says David and Jonathan had a sexual relationship, and that's not true. Scriptures never say that. They don't even support that. So I'm sure that probably everyone in this room knows someone who's confused, knows someone who believes that they are homosexual, or I can't even use the word bisexual because there's no such thing. Because my Bible tells me that if you're a man and you lay with a man, it don't matter if one of you shoulda, coulda, woulda, wanna be, can pay to be, or dress up as the opposite sex, you're still a man. Bruce Jenner is still Bruce Jenner. You're guilty of the sin of homosexuality. If you're a man, you lay with a woman outside of wedlock, you're guilty of the sin of fornication, sometimes adultery. That's what my truth tells me. My Bible tells me that. So there's no such thing as bisexual. All that person is guilty of the sin of homosexuality and the sin of fornication. That's it. Just like some people are just guilty of stealing or guilty of lying, it's no different. Sin is sin. So if each one of you told somebody what intimacy was, that didn't know what intimacy was, that thinks that they have an attraction for somebody else, you probably wouldn't be received very well. But how much do you love that individual? I know a young man who he loves his sister, and his sister identifies as a lesbian. Well, he was determined to teach her that she doesn't have an attraction to women, that she has a desire for intimacy with women. And she walked out of his life. She cut him off. She wouldn't talk to him. And now she's kind of recognized it because he planted that seed. And that's all I do is plant seeds. There are so many people in this world that are broken. And they're in the situation that they're in because they're broken, because they've had trauma, because they've been molested or beaten or just verbally abused. And that's just how it is. I mean, I'd rather you tell me what's wrong with me so that I might truly find happiness. Because there's, a lot, I'm telling you now, and I'm sure you're a speaker Monday, and the speakers you've heard talk about the suicide rate. Well, guess what? The suicide rate goes up with acceptance. And it goes up drastically with acceptance. Because when you first grant the acceptance, there's the euphoria. But once they realize that they're still that same person, and they're still trapped in that same darkness, and they're still broken, then it comes on them even heavier. And most of the time, they actually try to do it. And along with transgender therapy, with hormones and psychological therapy and all kinds of treatment, the suicide rate goes up as well. I remember sitting on a blanket in Coney Island, New York, with two transgenders that had the operation. And I was in New York to get one of my first procedures to go forth with the surgery. And we were just sitting there talking, and the one looked at me and said, "Don't do it." I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "All of my life, I looked for joy and happiness. I looked for peace and love. And I thought I'd find it if I could just be a girl." He said, "Now I am legally and medically a woman. and I'm more miserable now than ever before. He said, I think about taking my life every day. And the other one said, it's true. He said, I think about taking my life several times a day, every day. So the suicide rate dropping, and that's a lie. It's a lie. Just like intimacy is, especially sexual intercourse. It's a lie. But what other way? What better way to get all your minds going on sexual things, on deviant things? Because sexually, any darkness, porn, all of that, there is no such thing as I'm just going to look at this kind of porn, because then you get kind of immune to just that kind of porn. And then you have to find another high. So you go into some deeper or darker porn. So usually, in my experience and in my counsel with others, it goes from heterosexual porn to homosexual, transgender, to kiddie porn, to bestiality. It's a downward spiral. So if you want to set somebody free or make somebody free or introduce them to the one that can make them free, and many of you may not even believe in Jesus, but I'm here to tell you that Jesus made me free. Okay, I am a living, walking, breathing testimony. I shouldn't be here right now. I've had more healing in my life than probably anybody I know. But I do know some people who have been completely healed of HIV. And listen, it's not about being healed from HIV, because I'll take full-blown AIDS right now. I'll take stage 4 cancer right now. I'll take anything right now that would destroy my body, because I'm not living for my flesh. I'm not who I was, and I've been awoken. And that's the importance. The importance of it, knowing that I lived it and I walked it. And every single person that I lived with, every person that I had a relationship with, they were miserable. 30 plus years I spent in that movement, and I knew every time I slept with a man that I was doing something wrong, that something just wasn't right. You ever do something and you're like, I know something's just not right about this. That's how I was for 30 years. And everybody that I knew was the same way. And anytime any of you have a question, just let me know, because I love questions. Yes.
You had put in a note that got to read your bio, and you put in a note there, 2016, about the 1990s. That was during your time of confusion, right? With the whole transsexuality.
Yes, I was confused ever since the 70s.
Okay. And you had said, somewhat paraphrasing here, you talked about how you were a monster back then.
Mm-hmm.
How you do horrible things. Would you say that because of the loss of your father, lack of father at an early age, as well as this, at that time, what you thought is intimacy with men, with the whole sexual assault in the minor situation at that point?
Okay, you kind of lost me. Well, I didn't get the question.
You had said that you had molested, I think it's the term.
Yes.
A minor. Was that because of the whole intimacy and the whole confusion thing?
Yes. Okay. See, we know that most victims become victims, right? And are victimizers, I'm sorry. And so, yes, I lured 14, 15, 16-year-old boys into that movement when I was in my 20s and my 30s. Okay, and I was lured in, and I'm gonna tell you what the LGBT movement calls it. They call it recruited. I never called it recruited until I was out of it and recognized it as a movement and recognized myself as a victim. However, you can't keep that victim mentality. Well, I'm just this, I'm just that. You know, you have to press on. You have to move forward. And so, moving forward, I'm the first one to tell people this movement is after your children. I can't tell you all that they're after your children and your grandchildren because you don't have grandchildren, I hope. Hopefully, none of you have children. But the reason I know this and the proof I can give you is go anywhere where children gather, go anywhere where youth gather, and there's a rainbow there. There's some type of in this school. I'm positive that there is some type of LGBT rainbow group. They're in every school. They're in elementary schools. They are in gymnasiums. They're at the pediatrician's office. They're everywhere youth are. And then take a trip over to some of the nursing homes. Ain't no rainbows there. They don't want the old folks. They want the babies. They want the children. Because, and how many of you have heard of Drag Queen Story Hour? Well, Drag Queen Story Hour on their website, they say their target audience is ages 3 to 8 years old because they're the most impressionable. So if they are bold enough to say, my target audience is 3 to 8 year olds because that's when I can make an impression on them, why would you bring your children to Drag Queen Story Hour? Why would you promote Drag Queen Story Hour? You know, we've actually have shut down some drag queen, not me, but Christians in general and organizations have shut down some drag queen story hours because, and then just come to find out one of the main drag queens that are reading stories to the children and parents are bringing their children and putting them on his lap is a registered sex offender and he's a predator. Yes. Well, a few months ago, I was traveling and I was in a hotel and I'm in the lobby and I'm sitting there and this woman sat down and you could kind of tell that she was a little more masculine than most women. And we started talking. She's like, "So are you on vacation?" This and that. I'm like, "No, I'm traveling. I'm speaking, and so I don't care where I'm at. I'm giving testimony. I'm talking about my past. I'm telling you where I am now and where I was." And she's looking at me. She's like, "Well, I'm a lesbian." I was like, "So?" I'm still going to tell you my story, and if you sit here, you're going to hear it. And so she said to me, "But what about this transgender movement?" She said, "I think it's evil." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "They're targeting children. They're sexualizing children." So if we look at the next movement that could possibly come from the transgender movement alone, and if they are sexualizing children and bringing children into it, and if your child can determine their gender, then your child can also determine their sex partner, no matter their age. So the next movement I see coming in is the pedophile movement. And so I think it's all a plan. I think it's just all a plan. They're laying the foundation. The pedophile movement is already out there. Google Maps, minor attracted persons. Maps used to be NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. Okay, and it's a real group, and they've been around since like the 60s. And so now they have MAPS, minor attracted persons. Well, MAPS marches in the LGBT parades, okay, because they are a part of that movement. They fall under that umbrella. So do I believe that the LGBT movement has laid a foundation for the pedophile movement? Yes, I do. Do I think that all homosexuals are pedophiles? No. But I do believe that anyone that is involved in the homosexual movement is a victim of the pedophile movement in some way, shape, or form. Some were molested, some just became molesters, some both. That's just how it is. In that movement, they call boys twinks and the younger the boy, the more appealing he is. So they have clubs where twinks go and old men go to pick up twinks. Because if they look like they're in high school or junior high, those are the ones that they want. And this is all just part of living in that community. That's it. I mean, we all have this idea that we are born homosexual or that we're born transgender or confused. And we're not. We're all born into sin. We're shaped in iniquity. Iniquity at its root means perversion. So we're all shaped in perversion. We're all a bunch of perverts, basically. And so because of that, and it's not just sexually. Perversion could mean anything. It could mean mentally. It could mean physically. It could mean your morals, your values. So that's what it is. So to answer your question, I believe that it's a way to lay the foundation for the next movement that's coming. And again, the movements are not the people that are a part of them. The people that are a part of these movements are victims. They're victims of these movements. I met a young man last year at the LGBT Pride Parade who had been out there for 4 years and goes to everything. He was what he told me he was gay to stay. I told him I wasn't gay when I was a homosexual because I was miserable, but he didn't get that. So this young man, I started going and picking him up, spending time with him, taking him out to eat, getting to know him. And he couldn't go home because he was homosexual. His parents were like, not under my roof. And so he's living in Columbus, and he was drinking and drugging and clubbing and sleeping with numerous sex partners. And then about 4 months, 5 months later, he says, he calls me up. He says, I'm ready to go home. I was like, well, you can't go home. He's like, well, I can if I don't want to be a homosexual anymore. He says, and I really don't want to be. He says, would you take me home? And I was like, yeah. Then I found out he lived in like Steubenville, and I was like, man, because that's like 4 hours away. But as we're driving, I say, Jay, what happened? He said, you. I said, no, not me. Jesus, not me. He said, no, David, it was you. He said, you showed me that I could have a personal, close relationship, intimate, with another man, and it didn't have to be sexual. And so that's what they need to see. That's what that's all they need. They need to see that they can have a personal, close relationship with another man, and that it doesn't have to be sexual. I mean, I don't know. I don't know much even about Christianity because I've only been in it for going on 10 years. But I know a lot of Christians that have been in it for many years that tell me, well, we've never really learned about intimacy. We've never even really taught intimacy. And so maybe it's not even a Christian thing because I'd rather see somebody come to their senses and recognize the movement for what it is and come out of that movement than to go into something half-heartedly or not knowing or to keep denying themselves. Because those are the two best things to me is in the scriptures, people say, well, I was born gay. Well, I'm not going to argue with you. Jesus said be born again. Well, this is just who I am. Well, I'm not going to argue with you. Jesus said deny yourself. I mean, to me, it's kind of easy. It's kind of simple, and it really is that simple. And how much time do I have? 8 minutes. So, not that long ago, I wear dentures, okay, because of all the bone loss. All my teeth fell out of my mouth. Good teeth, too. No cavities. But anyway, my denture broke. So I'm like, this is an aggravation. This is an annoyance. This is a hindrance. So I go into the dental place, and they have a transgender receptionist. And I'm like, man, focus on your teeth. Focus on your teeth. So I go in the back, and the nurse says, so did the young lady at the front desk give you any paperwork? And I was like, well, I must have been at the wrong front desk because there's no young lady out there. And she said, Bella's a woman. I was like, no, he's a man. I said, unless you tell him he's a man, one, you're going to be held accountable for his sin as well for condoning it. But two, you're loving him to death. You're loving him straight to hell. So you do what you do. Well, last week I went back in and this transgender was flirting with me, and I'm like, this is really weird. This is ironic. And he says, he's going like this, messing with his mascara. It was like globbed up or something. And he says, sometimes I hate being a girl. I said, well, stop. And he goes, it's not that easy. I said, yes, it is. And he looks at me and says, look, it took me a long time to get to where I'm at. It really isn't that easy. And I leaned across the counter and I said, look, the man standing before you used to be transgender. And he went, I said, and it really is that easy. So I made my appointment and I left. Well, the next day, I get a phone call and he says, it's him. And he says, I'm just calling to confirm your appointment for like April 9th or something. I'm like, we just made this appointment yesterday, and you don't call to confirm appointments 2 weeks ahead of time. Is there something else you want to talk about? And he says, I'll listen, you talk. So I just talked. I just gave him my testimony. When I talked about being molested, he resonated with that. When I talked about being confused, he resonated with that. When I talked about not having a dad, he resonated with that. When I talked about being a prostitute, he resonated with that. When I talked about the drugs and the alcohol and the clubbing and partying, he resonated with all that. And then I said to him, I said, the only form of happiness I could find was in being who I wasn't. And he went, And of course, he was like, well, thank you, sir. I got to go. I was like, okay, well, he was at work. I said, just take my number home and call me. Because darn Skippy, I'm going to go pick him up. I'm going to take him to dinner. And I'm going to then just continue to give testimony to him. Because my goal is to love people to life, not to death. Because if you're in my life, and I call myself being not even just a man of God, we can put that aside. But if I call myself being your friend or your family or loving you or caring about you, then I had better tell you the truth. Because if not, I'm loving you straight to hell. I'm loving you to death. And I may even be held accountable for your sin. So that's all I got. So any other questions? Yes.
You are they can pitch on the way out. And then also here as well. David, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Okay.
Go up here.
Right. All right. That's good. I'm going to try to do that before.
We're pretty compelled.
Yeah. I like some of the eye contact with the nods. It's like, yes.
Yeah, it's period 3 right here. It'll be interesting. I think the next class will probably get more questions.
Okay.
Look, I'm sorry. I just in case I need. Yeah. I was here right. I'm trying to stay out.
No, not at all. Thank you. Thank you for the research.